Welcome to the Catholic Community Scripture Study, held at St. John the Evangelist Catholic Church in Jackson, Michigan. I will be your host, Todd Gale, as we walk our way through the Gospel according to St. Matthew. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to the Gospel according to St. Matthew. We're still in chapter 5 of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus has just talked about when you commit murder or adultery, you can do it with your thoughts as well as with your action. So he's really raising the bar on a whole lot of morality. Now he says, if your right eye causes you to sin, this is chapter 5, verse 29, pluck it out, throw it away. It's better to lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. Again, that word hell comes up. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. Better to lose one of your members than your whole body going into hell. So here Jesus is using a figure of speech. He obviously is not speaking literally. He's using hyperbole. He's talking in a way that should get our attention, that just kind of grabs us. And it's kind of funny. People are going to giggle a little bit at this. Unfortunately, some folks through the years took this very literally. Origen, one of the great church Bible commentaries from the very first centuries in the 200s AD, he took this very literally. He was struggling with a certain sin, and he castrated himself because of this passage. So we don't want people to take that so totally literally. The trouble with a literal interpretation, with cutting off your hand, cutting out your eye, or whatever else, right? It doesn't really go far enough. It doesn't deal with the issue. Even if you cut off your hand or you gouge out your eye, you still sin with your other hand or your other eye. And especially we still sin with our mind, right? So when all those things are gone, you can still sin. So what he's talking about is we have to be radical. We have to be decisive. We have to be willing to sacrifice in order to stop sinning. He's giving us a lifestyle where we're supposed to really take care of our sin. So maybe not cut off your hand, but maybe cut off your internet, cut off cable TV, cut out drugs and liquor. Maybe don't pluck out your eye, but pluck out gambling. Pluck out the desire for better possessions, the need to be popular. Pluck out the need to be the center of attention. I know a young man who is really struggling with pornography that smashed his computer and his phone, literally smashed them to pieces to break the habit. Many of us have probably cleared away bottles and emptied our houses of alcohol. That's pretty common. We may have cut up our credit cards before. That's the kind of thing that he's talking about. Because if we don't deal with our vices, we're going to remain trapped in sin for a very, very long time. We might never get beyond the vague wish to just, I want to do better, but we never make those steps. So we have to make that first step and deal with it decisively. In this whole image of cutting off the hand, you may have noticed before in Greek icons and in paintings, with a lot of religious paintings, especially the Greek icons, Eve is almost always painted with her right hand missing, because she grasped for that forbidden fruit, right? And kind of following up with what Jesus says here, that's how artists very often portray Eve. So then he goes on talking about divorce, and this is pretty tough. It has been said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except for on the ground of unchastity, makes her an adulteress, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Okay, This is a wee bit controversial in our day today, and this is difficult. This is a really hard teaching in our day. We might be squirming a little bit because we're all impacted by failed marriages one way or another, whether us directly or our parents or our kids or our loved ones. And this is a really difficult, tender subject. And it was really difficult in the days of Jesus. And it was really difficult in the days of Moses. I guess you could say it's a very difficult subject, right? Back in the days of Moses, way back in Leviticus, Moses gives a long list of thou shalt not lie with, thou shalt not sleep with, right? It was assumed that whoever you would lie with, whoever you had intercourse with, right? Whoever you had intimacy with, it was assumed that you were married. So what it's really talking about, those you are not allowed to marry. And because the two are totally connected, who you lie with and who you are married to, right? You couldn't marry close relatives, okay? So you couldn't have intimacy with mothers and in-laws and sisters and aunts, etc. So there were laws about not marrying anyone too close in relationship. But other than that, there's really nothing said about divorce in Genesis or Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers. Nothing is specifically said about divorce at all. Then in Deuteronomy, as the Israelites are getting ready to enter the promised land, Moses gives limited permission for divorce. He restates the law of the other books. Deuteronomy, the name Deuteronomy means the second giving of the law, the second law. But much of what's in this book, in Deuteronomy, was not given before. It's not just a repeat. It's the first time that we read about it here in Deuteronomy. It still reads as if it comes directly from God. But there's a lot of debate among scholars and among Jewish rabbis whether or not all of these new things that Moses reveals in Deuteronomy are from God himself, or are they from the mind of Moses? It's a little bit unclear. Now, traditionally, we believe all of it, including Deuteronomy, is given by God to Moses to give to the people. But it's a little squishy, and it's a little mysterious. It's a little confusing. Deuteronomy chapter 24 is the first time anything's really mentioned specifically about divorce. When a man takes a wife and marries her, if then she finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, we're going to come back to that, unfavorable and indecent, right? He writes her a bill of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and she departs out of his house. And it goes on to explain a bunch of other things. But basically, this is the only thing it talks about divorce. The bill of divorce is given by a man, and the bill would actually say, let this be from me, your writ of divorce and letter of dismissal and deed of liberation, that you may marry whatsoever man you will. That's what a bill of divorce actually said. Jesus tells us later on in chapter 19 of Matthew that the only reason Moses allows for this is because of the hardness of hearts of the Israelites. They have hard hearts. God doesn't really want divorce, but he allowed it, is what Jesus says. Permitted divorce, we learn from a great rabbi named Maimonides that Moses only permitted the divorce in order to prevent a greater sin. Because what was happening is the older wives would get murdered by their husbands so that they could marry a new wife, because there was no other way for divorce. So what they decided is this was to protect the women from being murdered so that their husbands could remarry. It was allowed, literally, to stop them from murdering. But yet, it doesn't stop the men from abandoning the wives, right? That's something we'll talk about here in a minute. Later on in chapter 19, using the formula statement that emphasizes his authority when Jesus says, I say to you, He says, I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, and marries another, commits adultery. In Mark's gospel, the Pharisees come to Jesus and they just blatantly ask him, what do you say about divorce? And Jesus says, well, Moses did allow it because of the hardness of their hearts. But that from the very beginning, God intended a married couple to be joined as one flesh. Therefore, according to Mark, Jesus says, if God has joined them together, no man has the authority to separate them. This is the grounds of the Catholic view on marriage. If it's a genuine sacramental marriage, if God was there, if they were joined together as one flesh in the presence of God, no one, not even the Pope, can give a decree of divorce. The very difficult part of this whole issue, the fact that marriage in ancient times was more of a legal contract for domestic work and for baby making. Marriage was not held at the level that we try to hold today, where there's really the dignity of both the husband and the wife, right? Divorce only applied to women in the law of Moses. The divorce was always from first to last in Jewish law, the husband's act. The term used in the Bible is the shiluach ishasha, the sending away of the wife. We never read of the sending away of a husband, right? So ideally, though, Israel did not condone divorce. Ideally, it did not happen. In Malachi chapter 2, God says, I hate divorce. The rabbis had a saying, the very altar sheds tears when a man divorces the wife of his youth. But that's the ideal. That's the high level. But the practice fell very, very short from the ideal. It did then, and it does now. Jesus elevates all the moral law, the law about anger, the law about murder, the law about lust, the law about divorce and marriage. He elevates all of it. Marriage is so beautiful when both male and female, when the husband and the wife, when they both believe that they both honor each other, that they're living for the betterment of the other. But there's a million things that could go wrong. And so often one person in the couple doesn't even want this to end and the other does. In the time of Moses, the man was the one that can make that decision. In Jesus's day, this permission of Deuteronomy 24 had become an instrument of cruelty against wives. The scribes busied themselves with all kinds of legal form and the bill of divorce, rewriting things, lots of laws, lots of rules, but they did nothing to restrain marriage or divorce, nothing to discourage divorce, nothing to protect the women at all. In the time of Jesus, the permission for grounds of divorce, they were debated within two schools, two of the most popular rabbis. You might recognize these names if you watch The Chosen, as these two gentlemen are talked about often. There's a school of Rabbi Shammai, sort of what we might say the traditionalist, the more conservative voice. Shammai restricted divorce only for the wife having an affair with another man that was authenticated by two witnesses. But then there's the school of Rabbi Hillel. He's sort of the liberal. He allowed divorce on the grounds of any complaint, even including burning the dinner or being unattractive, right? So you have Shammai on one hand, Hillel on the other hand, and both of them were very, very different. But what's interesting is not only what's happening in the Jewish world, but what the secular Roman world was doing regarding marriage and divorce. Because remember, they're living in a Jewish culture, but they've been overtaken by Rome. I want you to watch and see Satan's hand in this. You can just really see this. Years before Rome took control of the world, the Greeks ran the show, right? The Greek Empire had a whole social system based on relationships outside of marriage. Marriage was seen as necessary. It was a necessity to keep order and have some stability in society, but every man was encouraged to have courtesans and concubines and girlfriends, right? And it wasn't just limited to girlfriends only. What we would call a bromance, a gay relationship, was highly encouraged and very common among Greek men. Respectable and devout wives were to live almost like a life of seclusion. They were never to go out among men, and they were never to go out, especially to be tempted themselves or to tempt other people. But the men were very much encouraged to find pleasure any way that they could. The Greeks saw nothing wrong with this. They would attend the temple of Aphrodite, the fertility goddess in Corinth, or they go to another temple, the goddess Artemis in Ephesus, or any number of temples in the bigger cities of the empire. And there would be thousands of temple prostitutes called priestesses. And the men would come and make an offering with the priestess, right? And there were also male prostitutes, often young boys, who were in the temples who would also be used by the men. Okay, this was considered by the Greek culture to be natural and normal. In fact, a few decades before Jesus, Cicero, he was a Roman statesman, a lawyer, a scholar, a philosopher. Cicero once said, "When was this not done? When did anyone find fault with it? When was permission ever denied?" Right? This was part of their culture. Now, here's where it's interesting. Rome began to stir as an empire in the Italian peninsula around the 600s BC. And it was actually a solidly moral government ideal, at least towards marriage and women and families, at least at first. For the first several hundred years, as the empire slowly grows out of the Italian peninsula, they grow. They start to expand their territory. They start to overcome the Greeks bit by bit. Divorce was illegal, and there was no record of any Roman divorce. The first Roman civil divorce historically known was in 234 BC, when Spurius Carvilius Ruga divorced his wife because she never produced an heir for him. So as Rome grew larger and eventually overtook Greece politically and militarily, the Greeks overtook Rome morally. Do you get that? The Greeks lost the war, but they won the battle for morality. So no matter how you slice it, we see Satan's having a field day with marriage ethics, with the role of women and men, both with the Jews and with the secular culture of their day. When there's a strong pro-marriage and a pro-woman movement, it always gets squished within a couple generations. So Christ comes on the scene and he raises the bar to the highest of all. And it has not stopped the battle, though. That battle rages onward. So Jesus says, whoever divorces his wife except on the grounds of unchastity makes her an adulteress. That's assuming that she remarries again, right? Whoever divorces her for any reason except for sexual immorality. This is sometimes called the Matthean exception, the exception for Matthew. Sexual immorality translates from the Greek word porneia, where we get the word pornography. And it means any sexual activity outside of marriage, adultery or incest or premarital sex or polygamy or homosexuality or any number of things. Anything outside of the relationship of one man and one woman who's married is porneia. And Jesus clarifies that the indecency that can lead to divorce can only be in these matters. So to clarify, divorce in and of itself is not necessarily sinful, okay? The problem is when we have a legitimate marriage and we divorce and we get remarried and we join to another spouse, we're essentially married then to two people. The church's work in nullifying a marriage, when we have a nullity, right, an annulment, the church's work to nullify the marriage is to see if that first marriage was a sacrament. Did God join them together? If so, Jesus says man cannot separate. Now this is really hard, and this is very difficult stuff, and I'm just touching the surface. We're not even attempting to dig deep into this. But what I want you to see is that the spiral of morality is going upwards. And Jesus is raising the bar partially to support and protect the women. Don't even think improper things, Jesus said earlier. Don't even call somebody terrible names. And here he's saying, do not enter into this divorce where the two that have become one are separated. So now Jesus interprets the law concerning oaths. Matthew is just recording several different things he's talking about, and he just jumps from one to the other to the other. And in verse 33, Jesus starts talking about oaths. And you've heard that it said, you shall not swear falsely, but I say don't swear at all. By heaven, for it's God's throne, or by earth, let your yes be yes and your no be no. What's he talking about there? Well, this is a very cultural thing that was going on in the time of Israel, and it's not something that we totally relate to, I think, in modern day America much. When we swear, when we take an oath, we're declaring a binding contract. We're declaring a covenant. When we swear, we're invoking God's name. We make an oath. I swear to God, blah, 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 whatever that is. We're invoking God's name. We're declaring something to be true and real and binding. We're bringing God into that covenant. He becomes a partner with us. Do we have the authority to do that? Why would someone even feel the need for swearing an oath? Well, we do that because we are liars and we're deceivers. And if we were always truth tellers, there'd be no need to take an oath. We do that to say, hey, you can trust me. I'm even invoking God's name and bringing him into this, if you don't believe me. There's a terrific commentary on this on page 16 of the Ignatius Catholic Study Bible, where it says 533, do not swear falsely. I'm not going to read that. I'll let you read that. It's a great text note. By the time of Jesus, the scribes and the Pharisees had twisted the law that said, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, to permit taking virtually every other name in a false oath. I swear by your life. I swear by heaven. I swear by my head. I swear by my mother's grave. I swear by Jerusalem. I swear by the earth, on and on and on. It had become so common to make an oath when none was needed. People were totally overusing it. People have always used sacred language in the most meaningless ways. We tend to blow things out of proportion, and we say big godly things about just frivolent, irreverent things. I swear on my family name, that was the best pizza of my life. I swear to God and Jesus, Mary and Joseph, that was the best football game I ever saw. That kind of stuff. Jesus is saying, no, don't do that. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Having to swear demonstrates that there's not enough weight in our own character to be trusted, right? We can't even confirm our own words. How much better to just be trustworthy? Now, some have taken this as an absolute prohibition against any oath. Like we're never supposed to swear an oath ever for any reason. But it's pretty clear from Christian history that oaths were permitted under certain circumstances, as long as they're not abused, as long as they're not a cover for deception, as long as we're not hiding behind a lie when we do that. In fact, God himself swears oaths. In Hebrews chapter 6, when God made a promise to Abraham because he had no one greater by whom to swear, he swore by himself, saying, I will surely bless you and multiply you. In Luke chapter 1, Zechariah's prophecy, he said the oath which God swore to our father Abraham. Paul makes oaths in Romans and in 2 Corinthians and Galatians and in 1 Thessalonians. So, and the text note, again, in our study Bible has some really great information on that. So go ahead and read that. Jesus is not saying don't take any oath, but don't take it lightly. Don't take it, frivolously. Then we get to one of the most over-quoted and misunderstood parts of what Jesus teaches in the Sermon on the Mount. In verse 38 to 42, he talks about how you've heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. I tell you, don't resist an evil person. If you get slapped on your right cheek, turn and offer them the left. If they steal your tunic, let them have your cloak. If you are compelled to go 1 mile, you go 2 miles. The Mosaic law did teach an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth in Exodus 21. But over time, the religious teachers had moved this commandment out of its proper place, and it was supposed to be limiting payback, limiting retribution. You can't do more for an eye than an eye, right? Back in the day, if you took my eye in a fight, I'd take both your eyes, your farm, and your family, right? So when this was originally put in place with Moses, he's raising the morality. He's raising the spiral of morality that's going up. Now it's tit for tat. It's called the lex talionis, the law of retribution in Latin. We also find it in the Code of Hammurabi, if you remember that. And some of the ancient Near East ethical codes and moral codes had similar things. The law of lex talionis said it's a law of suchness. If such is taken, such can be required. The law was meant to limit revenge. It was meant to make an equal punishment. But Gandhi famously said, he pointed out, that an eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. When does it end? Right? Jesus would agree with that. The scribes and the Pharisees had taken this to the extreme. And what they had done with their rules, they made it almost an obligation. If somebody took your eye, you had to revenge and take an eye. You can just imagine the minutia of rules piled on, one on top of the other by the scribes, for what revenge was equal to what sort of attack. But now, again, Jesus is elevating this rule higher and higher, taking that moral law and taking it up to the next level. He's going for an upgrade. We're going to supersize it. He says, I say to you, resist any act of revenge. He presents how to live out this eye for an eye law. How do we live this out? How do we do this practically? Well, he talks about a couple scenarios. When you get slapped, when you get pressed into service. So when a person insults us, slaps you on the right cheek, we want to give them back what they gave to us plus more. Jesus said, no, we should patiently bear such an insult and such an offense and resist an evil person who insults us this way. So are we supposed to just let people trample all over us? Are we doormats? Do we let evil run the world? No. Evil must be resisted. That was the whole purpose of Jesus, right? His whole purpose of his life was to defeat the works of the devil. In the big picture of good versus evil, we must battle the evil within us. And we're called to right the wrong, and we're called to seek justice. But this is not so much about physical violence as it is about being persecuted and insulted. Slap on the face with the back of the hand is a cultural insult. It's worse than a middle finger or calling terrible F-bomb names in our culture, right? Ancient Jewish writing said striking someone with the back of the hand was the severest insult, punishable by a heavy fine even. So Jesus doesn't mean that just if someone comes and attacks you with a club or a knife, that we stand passively and ask for more, right? That's not what he's saying. This has to do with persecution and what we stand for. See, if you're right-handed and you slap someone on the right cheek, the only way to do it without really contorting your arm around is to backhand them or to make a fist. The other thought is that if you use the left hand, right? So if you're left-handed and you're striking the right cheek, that's an even greater insult because the left hand was used to clean yourself in the latrine, if you know what I mean. The left hand was literally the unclean hand. So either way you look at it, whether you're using a left hand or you're using the back of the right hand, either way, Jesus suggests that what you should do is shocking. No. If you're going to slap me, at least have the respect to use the clean hand, or at least have the respect to use the flat of your palm. Why don't you try it again? And this time do it right. Right? Why is he suggesting that? What's the heart of this? What is Jesus getting at? The true Christian has already learned, from what he said earlier, has already learned that we will be blessed when we are insulted and persecuted. We are to expect insults, and we are to expect not to retaliate. We should not retaliate. When we think how Jesus himself was insulted, when he was spoken against, he was called a glutton, a drunk, illegitimate child, a blasphemer, a madman, possessed by demons, a liar, and on and on and on. We see that he lived this out himself. Don't think this has anything to do with actual physical assault. That's not what he's talking about. And the Catechism is really clear. We do have a duty to protect our family. We do have a duty to protect ourselves, our property, and our country. This is about personal insults, a slap against our pride, against our reputation. Be prepared for that and be dignified. And in the next part, the actual Greek says, and to the one willing you to sue, and the tunic of you to take, yield also the cloak. So under the law of Moses, the outer cloak could not be taken from someone. That's in Exodus 22 and Deuteronomy 24. The tunic was a chitona, and a chitona, however you would say that. And it's the one piece kind of long garment, like a long nightshirt. It's the wardrobe of the Middle East, and that everything starts with that. It starts with the tunic. Everyone has a tunic as the basic clothing. Most people had at least two. So if you sued someone for your tunic, you could still have at least one tunic. The cloak, the outer cloak, was called the himation, and it was a long wrap that could be used as a cape. It could be tied around the waist. It could be used over the head as a covering. It could be used at night as a blanket. It was multi-use, and sometimes it was decorative. Sometimes it was made of beautiful materials for special occasions. Most people only had one cloak, and they had a couple of tunics. Legally, no one could take your cloak. It was essential against the elements. And if you had nothing else, at least you could cover up with this cloak, blanket, shawl, right? Jesus is saying, step out and offer more. It's unexpected. It's over the top kindness in the face of insult. Bishop Robert Barron says, to be so kind is to guilt them into seeing the harm that they've done. It's like putting a mirror up to their meanness. Don't just hit me with your left hand. Show me respect. Use your right hand. Don't just take the tunic. Here, I'll stand naked so you can have it all. At least I'll take less for me, more for you. As Christians, we should not be pounding on the table talking about our rights, but about our responsibilities. What can we do more for others? And when someone compels us to go 1 mile or 2 miles, this is actually from Persia. The Persians, which is around the present day Iran area, the Persians had an amazing postal and delivery route. Mail and supplies and materials were transported from different posts. They were about 1 mile apart. And at each of those 1 mile stops, there was usually food and water and assistance for the horse or the ass or the beast of burden, whatever it was they were riding. And if there was nothing at the post, the local citizens would be pressed to help serve. Well, Rome really liked that concept. Rome used that themselves. Judea was under Roman military occupation. So under military law, any Roman soldier might command a Jew or any citizen to carry a soldier's pack, or to help transport weapons, or to help transport supplies for up to 1 mile, but only 1 mile. This is what happened when Simon of Cyrene was tasked to help carry the cross of Jesus, right? So here, Jesus is saying, if you get pressed into service like that, go beyond the 1 mile required by law and give another mile out of your free choice. This is how we transform and attempt to manipulate us into a free act of love. This is how we take power from those that are trying to be mean. We take power against brutal force and downright meanness, turning it into something positive, turning it into something loving and kind. And the Jews fiercely resented this. They would have been forced to do travels like this on the Sabbath. They would have been forced to break Shabbat rule, right, of not working. They were infuriated by the Romans. The secular world would say you insist on your own right. You love your neighbor and you hate your enemy and you do what you need to for you. But the new law says, no, suffer wrong for the benefit of peace. Love your enemy. Lavish your time and your effort on everyone. Give to those who ask of you. The only limit to this kind of sacrifice is the limit that love will impose. It isn't loving to give in to somebody's manipulation, right? It isn't loving to just let somebody be mean, right? We're supposed to transform that meanness and that manipulation into a free act of love. So how do we apply this in our real lives? How does this work? Well, if someone is cruel and manipulating and doing something wrong, we don't want to be an accomplice to sin. If someone's running drugs or embezzling money or they want us to join in with something, Jesus isn't saying that we always have to do what they ask. Love isn't always giving in. But if someone is asking something from us that's not necessarily sinful, maybe it's something that could really help them. If it is something that we can transform from some begrudging obligation, we're just doing it because we have to, if we can actually make this a showing of respect and love, even if they don't deserve it, even if they're our enemies, then we should do it. In fact, we should do it times 2. The Christian is not called only to do what we want to do. The Christian is called to help, to make the world better, to make the world filled with salt and light. We are called to be the salt of the earth and the light. Amen? So someone you really like, someone you really dislike asks you for something. Then you lovingly respond out of duty and out of love, and you serve them. You know, you're asked to bring a passing dish by someone who is not your best friend. Well, maybe you bring 2. Maybe you ask if you can cater the whole meal. Someone you greatly dislike asks you for a ride to get dropped off somewhere. Well, offer to drive them there, wait for them, and bring them back home. True enemy of yours has a problem with their furnace. They ask if you can look at it. Well, don't just look at it, offer to fix it. See it through to the end. Maybe you pay for the repair. But don't cross the line into building up sin. Don't do something illegal or wrong. But take that opportunity to be salt, to preserve and to flavor. We might say that Paul repeated this idea of Jesus when he said, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." That's from Romans 12. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. We're watching as Jesus slowly is taking this level of morality up the spiral and raising the bar. We have lots more as we look at this, continuing the next time we meet. Thanks for joining me. I love this. I hope you do too. God bless. Bye. Thank you so much for walking the way through the Gospel of Matthew.